Some point to verses like this. There's another one with that list in Ephesians. Some point to these verses and suggest that that is the evidence of the first and earliest worship wars. That is to say, from almost the very beginning of the Christian experiment, there was a struggle in the church between people of differing preferences, experiences, and cultural backgrounds. Psalms, of course, refer to the Psalms, the earliest prayer book and hymn book for both the Jewish believers and Christian believers. And the earliest Christians were, of course, Jewish folk who would bring their psalms with them into worship. The hymns, they think, refer to the Gentile believers who came, most of them, from a Greek or Roman worship where they sang hymns to the pagan gods. And these new Gentile converts rewrote some of those hymns to give glory to Jesus and the God of our Bible and the Holy Spirit. And then, of course, whether their backgrounds were Gentile or Jewish, there were believers writing new songs of faith. And, of course, the folks from the Jewish origin looked askance at Greek hymns being rewritten. You can imagine that. The Gentile believers are unfamiliar with the Psalms, and they're looking at those askance. You can imagine both groups looking with disapproval at new music. And Paul's response, sing them all. Just sing them. Sing praise to God with gratitude in your heart. Lift up your voices and worship. Well, what is worship anyway? And how is music connected to it? I mean, we get together every week and we worship. What is it that we're actually doing? My very favorite description of worship comes from Søren Kierkegaard. He was a Danish Christian and theologian living and working in the early to mid 1800s. And he was dismayed with what he perceived to be sort of a ritual Christianity, that people went to church because that's what you did. And when they went, they wanted to hear great soloists, beautiful music, and eloquent preachers. Does that sound familiar? In effect, Kierkegaard said, people are coming to church to be entertained for theater. And so Kierkegaard said, fine, if you want to think about worship as theater, you've got to get it right. Usually when we think of church as theater, we think of the congregation as the audience, right? And as the preacher, the liturgist, or the choir as the actors. Well, not so, says Kierkegaard. God is always the audience to worship. God is the audience. And the actors in worship, that's the congregation. You are the workers in worship. Liturgy is the Latin word for work of the people. When we come together to worship, this is your work that you offer to God. So what the heck are the preacher and the choir doing? Well, we're like the prompters at the edge of the stage, to use Kierkegaard's example. And we're prompting your worship. We're assisting in your worship. And together, I'm also a worshiper, but together we are worshiping. Music, I think since worship is this corporate experience and you are the worshipers, we together, I think that's one reason why music, and especially congregational singing, is so important. Because that's a moment when our voices are united together in praise to God in a way that lifts us all up. When I was on my sabbatical back in 2011, mostly in Scotland and Ireland, and I dipped down a little bit into England because I met an English vicar, and I went to church with her on a Sunday morning to a speaking service, which I'd never heard of, but it's all words. You just speak through the liturgy. There's no music, no hymns, no prelude, no postlude, no offertory. There's no music. And I found it sadly lacking for me. And I think it's because I need that corporate experience of singing with you to feel like I have worshiped, to feel like I have offered something up to God. Well, this past week, Carol and I looked over the hymns that you shared with us, are your favorites, and we decided to see if we could represent some of the breadth of the church's music. It would be impossible to do that on a Sunday morning, even if we were all committed to being here for hours. But we did end up with hymns from various centuries. Let All Mortal Flesh, that we're going to sing in just a moment, the first verse of, that's one of the very oldest hymns. You can find some older words, but they're not in use anymore. Let All Mortal Flesh is still a hymn that's found in almost every hymnal, and it's still sung in most countries around the world. I think our hymnal says it's 4th century, which would be 300s, but there's some that say that that there's evidence of these words from the late 200s. So these are very ancient words that the church has sung. And it speaks of the greatest mystery of the Christian faith, the incarnation of God in Jesus, and the paradox of the Almighty being born in human form. Let us sing.